This particular episode is titled Unpacking Land as a Means to Income for Women. So this translated, the title for this particular topic is going to be Kuvunza Pinda Senzira Yekuti Vadzisishe Mupire, which is unpacking land as a means to income for women, inshallah. So then the authors that have particularly influenced this episode are Tandon Dihi and Mark Vecherif, who have basically written an article about corporate land and deals of rural women in Africa, as well as Sam Moyo, who has basically spoken about land ownership patterns and income inequality within Southern Africa. So then our guests for this particular episode are Hloniphile and Ipileng. I would firstly like to express my gratitude again to you guys for availing yourselves for this podcast. So I think we can get right into it. So in the previous episode, we basically learned and unpacked what customary law is and how customary law impacts the access of land for women. But then in this particular episode, we want to unpack how land can then be used as a form of income for women, essentially. So what are your thoughts going into this particular topic? I think we can start with Hloniphile.
Hi. So my thoughts on this is that while land is a valuable resource for access to as an economic means for women, the economic structure of how we live, of our government, or the economic system of our current economic system does not allow, or it hinders the progress of women making much more income or developing that land into higher means. Because in order for women to as they might have land, né? And that land they might be able to farm on it and use it for grazing pastures and all that. But without the economic means to take or the financing to take those small businesses, which I would call them the small scale farming, to take it into a medium scale farming or a large scale farming. Land in itself does not give women economic freedom, because if they truly to say land is an economic freedom, we would have to say, fine, you have the land, you have the skills to farm, then let's give you the financing part to move from a small scale farmer or a subsistence farmer to a small scale farmer, and a small scale farmer to a medium scale and a large scale farmer. So we need also, when we talk about this issue as land as an income for women, we also need to talk about them having the resources to develop their land to make greater income, or make what I would say generational wealth of the land that they would be owning. Thank you.
Yes, I completely agree with you, Hloniphile. Ipileng, do you want to give it a shot?
Okay. So when I think about land, I think that land ownership is extremely important for women, in the sense that when we look at currently how the workplace is set up, like they love to almost convey this narrative that women are, we are empowering women, there's affirmative action, women are now put into, powerful positions, CEO positions. But, I have an issue with that, because first of all, there is a smaller percentage of women that are being put in. It's not as though everybody can qualify, everybody has that I don't know how to explain it, but like for a man, for example, he just needs to be great at his job and whatever, and he's seen, he's recognized, and he's put in those positions. Women, only a small scale, only a small amount of women are put into those positions when it comes to the workplace dynamics, when it comes to positions and all of that. So I don't feel like enough women are in those positions, not because we are not equipped enough. No, we are. It's just that we are conditionally accepted. You know, they take some of us and not all of us, even though all of us are well equipped to do the same job. So I think that's important. And there's still a huge disparity in terms of pay. There's still a huge advocacy for the fact that women and men are not paid the same. It's still a reality. And another thing, I genuinely feel like, yes, like I said, a lot of things come with conditions as well for women. You know, women are still treated in a certain way, are still stigmatized in the workplace. A lot of the conversations that I'm around when I speak to different women who are working, they always say, like, in terms of recognition, in terms of climbing up higher, like, you have to be like you I also used to read things where they used to talk about women in the political space, and they used to say that women back in BC days, Black consciousness days, during the movements, they had to like act like men. They had to be as angry. They had to inhibit like characteristics that men had for them to be accepted. They weren't accepted just as they were. So we have to go through all these conditions to be accepted. Rather, let us have our own things. Rather, let's have land. Let's have land. Let's see how we can make income off of that, whether it be property, it be agriculture there. Let's have that land. That's big. That's more powerful than having a CEO or managerial or partnership position. Because even with that, there's disparities. Nothing is guaranteed there, you know. And like I said, a small amount of women are taken in, and when they're taken in, there are conditions. There is stigmatization. The lived reality of a woman and a man, it's not the same. It's almost as emotional. It's almost emotional abuse what women have to go through when they're in those positions that are traditionally allocated for men. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, feeling. That's actually a very interesting analysis lens that I hadn't thought about myself. So then I think for me with this particular episode, I think it's important to like note how land is like one of the most critical economic resources for the vast majority of the rural poor who depend on, like, for example, agriculture in order to sustain their livelihoods, right? So in particular, women's land rights are fundamental to rural development outcomes, as women's ownership and control over land can affect what households produce and how these and how the proceeds from agricultural production are allocated within the family. So then for me, I think women play a critical roles in food production in the developing world and are often like responsible for producing for their own family's consumption. But then women, as Ipileng has also highlighted, are less likely to own or control land compared to men, particularly like in rural areas. So I think an example we can give of this is how, let's say maybe a woman has access to like land in a rural area, right? If she does do that, then she has access to like being able to farm. Number one, she has access to markets, she has access to, you know, like financial opportunities that can allow her to like better her livelihood, in other words. So in other words, she can maybe like have a farming plot or something on the land that she's been allocated. She can farm on that particular land, and she can then like sell some of the goods that she's creating, not necessarily only like stick to feeding her kids. So I want to find out from you guys, like, do you think that this is fair then? Because already, like, we've established that a lot of women don't necessarily have access to land. And do you think that it's fair to continuously like have this particular concept of customary law continuously being implemented and limiting women, in other words, from gaining access to money, if we can call it that? Because one of the points we want to analyze within the podcast as a whole is like how land can then be used as an agricultural aspect to, you know, like creating income and generating. I think as Ipileng mentioned, was it Lungile? I think it was Lungile actually who mentioned also generational wealth and stuff like that, and how land can be used for that. So another contradictory point I actually just thought of is like Black people. Let's take South Africa for example, right? We had the whole apartheid system, and like now we have the whole expropriation of land concept, right? So what do you guys think? Do you guys think that land can be used as a means to like gaining, if we can call it, generational wealth? And if so, how? Because, okay, before you answer the question, right, I just wanted to remember like a country like Zimbabwe, in other words, who basically had land expropriation and land reform, in other words, right? But then people were given land, but they didn't know like what to do with it. So how do you think, in other words, we can like work around ensuring that women gain access to land and ensuring that they actually know what to do with the land once they've been given that opportunity? So I think we can start with Lungile. What do you think about this whole like this whole, proposal or plan? Lungile, are you there? Okay, Ipileng, I think you can go ahead then. I think Lungile might be having network problems.
Oh, okay. Um, okay, so I definitely think that it's important. Lungile did mention it actually a while ago, where he was talking about, giving women skills to what to do with the land, because at the end of the day, what's the point of land if we don't know what to do with it? So definitely, I do believe that there should be land expropriation without compensation. And as well, on top of that, I feel like there needs to be an upskilling in terms of what to do with the land, how they can cultivate the land, and make income in as many ways as possible on the land. I do believe that that's what's important. And on the other point you're talking about customary law, is it hindering women? And I generally feel like it does. I don't think that we should do away with customary law completely, but I do feel like, especially when we're looking at Zimbabwe as a case study, I think that we shouldn't do away with it, but where customary law infringes upon the rights of women in terms of equality and dignity, I definitely think that we should limit it to that degree, because that's what we do even in South African law. When courts in South Africa interpret law, and when they look at customary law, when they're dealing with customary law cases, and they see that how customary law regulates a man and a woman's marriage in case they want a divorce, if they see that in any way it's infringing upon the woman's equality and dignity, they limit the customary law and make sure that in their exercising of the customary law, it doesn't interfere with the rights of equality and dignity that a woman has. They make sure that whatever they rule, a woman is not disadvantaged. It's not unjust and unfair to women. And I think that that's the same system that needs to be implemented in Zimbabwe. A customary law, when it comes to cases, the judges should not exercise it to the absolute. I feel like when it starts to infringe upon women's dignity and equality, and it starts to be unfair and informed by patriarchy, which is oppressive to women. When it starts doing that, there should be a limit. So I don't think that customary law necessarily works for women. I think that it shouldn't be absolute. I think that the rights that are accorded with customary law shouldn't be absolute. They should definitely be limited. On the next question, yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Ipileng. Lungile, do you have anything else to add on?
I lost you a bit there because this network, there was load shedding here. But what I could add on is that, customary law does limit access to women to land. And if you look at land, in this episode, we are talking about land as an income for women. And I think before I disconnected, people were saying women must now venture, since they are struggling to, I think, not to misquote her, they're struggling to get into these positions of being a CEO and this, maybe perhaps land, since they are the ones who graze it, maybe perhaps land would be their savior and where they could make income and do this. And it's all good and fair that women will do that, but in order for them to develop those lands, they need also the financing and our economic system that it's less likely to give a woman financing to develop their land and make it into a sustainable farm or any other thing without having leverage over them or properties or whatsoever. They are less likely to do that. And I think I also heard Ipeling said something about, I think it was customary law in South Africa. It's actually quite interesting how in South Africa 2 years ago or a year ago, I'm not sure, how women in KZN took the Ingonyama Trust to say, I don't know if they took the king or whatsoever, but they took the traditional rulers to court to say they don't have access to land. And apparently what was happening there in the Zulu land, KwaZulu, was that, a rural KwaZulu, was that women, if women had inherited land, and or maybe they had land through their husband, but they didn't have male children, that land then goes, that they can own the land, then it goes to maybe the brother of the husband or whatsoever, another male person within the family. It does not go to them, and they say it was an infringement on their rights of equality, and they won that case. Certainly, our current customary law does limit access to women, and I think you also talked about the case for Zimbabwe. The Zimbabwean constitution actually does give women access to equality in their marriages. And we were talking about Mary, we did a research. Well, you said we should do a research on Zimbabwe, and then it did say that women have equal access to everything that is property, everything that is being owned. Then maybe perhaps the problem here is not whether women don't have rights, is who denies them rights. And certainly the problem here is that customary law denies them rights.
Yes.
And maybe we should do away with customary law, or maybe we should change that factor. And I don't know, but yeah, that's all I can say.
Okay, Longile, I just have to disagree with you. I think where you mentioned that women in Zimbabwe do have equal rights to land, I have to disagree with you, because I think it's dependent on where the woman is staying. Because Zimbabwe is still very backward in terms of like equal rights. So then actually in terms of land, women can predominantly gain access to land in like your modern areas. In other words, examples would be like areas like Harare, which is the country's capital. That's where women can actually gain equal rights to land. And that's only if they were legally married or married in community of property to their partner. Then they can actually claim half or whatever, how much they need or want from their partner. But then in examples of like rural areas where majority of the people actually aren't married legally, they don't necessarily have access to that particular land, because as we've unpacked, they practice a lot of customary law. In other words, the person who has control over the land within those rural areas is the chief. And usually the chief is in favor of the men. In other words, that's also perpetuating patriarchy. So essentially, to summarize or conclude, women in rural areas in Zimbabwe don't have access to land, right? And especially if like maybe they've divorced their partner or whatever, they can predominantly gain access to land only if they were married to their partner in community of property, which is usually in your urban areas. So then I think we can then wrap up this particular episode and say that women can gain access to land, and I guess they can use it as a means of income production. But then in doing so, we need to ensure that we're equipping these women with the right resources, the right knowledge, the right infrastructure to ensure that they actually are successful in their ventures towards gaining financial liberty or gaining financial strength, in other words. So yeah. Thank you so much for attending this particular episode within the podcast. We hope to catch you in our next episode, where we will be unpacking the existing land allocation systems, which I think Lungile was actually about to get into, as when you mentioned who's allocating the land. So that's basically what we're going to be speaking about in our next episode. So then please make sure that you do catch us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. To Madagascar.